On October 12, 2023, after a massive multinational search effort spanning 2 weeks and covering over 250,000 square miles of the South Pacific, John and Evelyn Davenport were officially declared lost at sea. The search was called off. Their 2 grown children, who had spent agonizing days coordinating with rescue authorities from their homes in Seattle, held a small, private memorial. Friends and family shared stories of a loving, adventurous couple who had died doing what they loved. The ocean, it was said, had claimed them. The world moved on. For 200 days, the story of the Davenports was a closed chapter, a tragedy filed away. But the ocean is patient. It keeps its secrets, but not always forever. What was found 200 days later by a Coast Guard cutter on a routine patrol thousands of miles from the original search area would not just reopen that chapter, it would rewrite the very definition of human endurance. John Davenport, at 63, was a retired civil engineer. He was a man of quiet competence, a man who believed in systems, redundancy, and the laws of physics. His approach to sailing was the same as his approach to building bridges: meticulous, calculated, and with an unwavering respect for the forces of nature. His wife, Evelyn, known to everyone as Evie, was his perfect counterpart. At 61, she was a retired art historian and a passionate amateur botanist. Where John saw physics, Evie saw poetry. She saw the art in the curve of a sail, the history in the shape of a wave, and the biology in the phosphorescent glow of their wake at night. Their vessel, a 40-foot Valiant sailboat named Serenity, was their floating home, the culmination of a decade of dreaming and planning. The Valiant 40 is a legendary blue water cruiser, renowned for its strength, stability, and kindness in a heavy sea. The Davenports had spent 2 years and a significant portion of their retirement savings preparing Serenity for a circumnavigation. John had personally overseen every refit. He replaced the standing rigging, rebuilt the Perkins diesel engine, and installed 3 separate redundant navigation systems. Evie, meanwhile, designed a sophisticated system for growing sprouts and herbs hydroponically in the main cabin, determined to have fresh greens even in the middle of the ocean. They were not reckless adventurers. They were perhaps 2 of the most prepared cruisers to ever leave the coast. Their journey began in San Diego in the spring of 2023. They sailed down to Mexico, then embarked on the 3,000 nautical mile passage to the Marquesas Islands. The coconut milk run, as sailors call it, was idyllic. They found their rhythm, falling into the easy cadence of life at sea. John's methodical nature and Evie's boundless curiosity made them a perfect team. They navigated, cooked, maintained the boat, and spent hours just watching the sky and the sea, feeling the profound peace they had sought for so long. From French Polynesia, they sailed to Tonga, then to Fiji. Their logbooks, which they diligently kept, were filled with Evie's beautiful sketches of tropical flowers and John's precise notes on wind speed, barometric pressure, and system performance. By late September, after 6 months of successful cruising, they were in Fiji, preparing for the next major leg of their journey, the 2,500-mile passage to New Zealand. This passage is known to be one of the most challenging in the Pacific. It requires crossing a notorious stretch of ocean where low-pressure systems, known as Tasman sea lows, can form with terrifying speed, generating storm-force winds and enormous seas. John spent a week studying weather charts, communicating with professional weather routers via their satellite phone. He identified what he believed was a perfect 5-day weather window, a stable ridge of high pressure between 2 passing lows. On September 28th, under clear skies and with a favorable forecast, John and Evie sailed Serenity out of Musket Cove, Fiji, pointing her bow south towards New Zealand. For the first 3 days, the forecast held true. The sailing was magnificent, but on the 4th day, the sky began to take on a strange, bruised yellowish hue. The barometer, which had been steady, began to plummet at an alarming rate. A low-pressure system to the west had not just deepened, it had exploded in intensity, expanding and accelerating eastward far faster than any of the models had predicted. It was a weather bomb, a sailor's worst nightmare. Within 6 hours, they went from pleasant sailing to a full-blown survival storm. The wind shrieked, climbing from 20 knots to a steady 60, with gusts hitting 75. The sea transformed into a terrifying landscape of liquid mountains. Waves, 40 to 50 feet high, with breaking crests of white foam, crashed down on them. Inside Serenity, the world was a cacophony of roaring wind and the thunderous impact of water against the hull. They were sailing under bare poles, with no sails up, trailing long warps and a sea anchor to keep the boat's stern pointed into the waves. They were strapped into their bunks, exhausted, just trying to hold on as their vessel was tossed about like a toy. The disaster struck near midnight on the second day of the storm. During a particularly violent surf down the face of a monstrous wave, the boat slewed sideways. Before it could correct itself, a massive breaking crest, a wall of solid water, crashed down onto its beam, rolling the boat a full 360 degrees. The sound of the mast snapping was not a crack, but a deafening metallic explosion that vibrated through the entire hull. When Serenity righted herself, she was a crippled wreck. The mast was gone, a tangled mess of wires and snapped aluminum dragging in the water alongside the boat, threatening to hole the hull. Drenched and disoriented, John and Evie worked for 2 agonizing hours in the screaming wind to cut away the wreckage. When the last wire was severed, they were left with a bare, wounded deck. They were dismasted. Their immediate thought was the EEP, the emergency beacon that would be their lifeline. It was mounted in a bracket just inside the companionway. But the force of the rollover had been so violent that the bracket had snapped, and the EEP had been washed overboard, lost forever to the churning sea. A cold dread, far worse than the fear of the storm, began to set in, but there was still hope. The engine. John crawled to the engine compartment. He turned the key. The starter engaged, but the engine only coughed and sputtered. Water, forced into the fuel tank's air vent during the rollover, had contaminated their diesel. The engine was useless. In the space of a few hours, they had gone from capable cruisers to a ghost ship. No mast, no engine, no EEP. They were adrift, utterly powerless, in one of the most remote and storm-tossed regions of the planet. As the storm finally passed 2 days later, leaving behind an exhausted, lumpy sea, the true scale of their predicament became clear. They were alive. The hull of the Valiant 40, a testament to its legendary build quality, was intact. But they were floating in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from any major shipping lane. The official search, they knew, would be concentrated along their planned route to New Zealand. But the storm had pushed them hundreds of miles east. They were outside the box. No one would be looking for them here. The first month was a blur of organized, desperate activity. Hope of a chance encounter with a ship was still strong. John, the engineer, took inventory. They had about a month's worth of canned goods, a few gallons of fresh water, and a broken boat. Their first priority was water. The boat's water maker was electric and useless without a running engine. They had to rely on catching rain. John jury-rigged a system using a tattered piece of sailcloth and a series of buckets. They were at the mercy of the weather. Evie, the botanist, took charge of food. She meticulously rationed their supplies, calculating their caloric intake down to the last bean. She managed to save her sprouting jars, and the fresh green shoots they produced became their most prized possession, a source of vital nutrients and a powerful symbol of life in a world of decay. Days bled into weeks. The vast, empty horizon became both their reality and their tormentor. They saw no ships, no planes, nothing. The initial adrenaline faded, replaced by a grinding, monotonous routine of survival. They fished. John, using his engineering mind, fashioned hooks from electrical wire and lures from strips of aluminum foil and colorful plastic he cut from bottle caps. They caught mahi-mahi and the occasional tuna, their main source of protein. It was during this period that their logbook transformed. It was no longer just a record of their journey. It became the central pillar of their existence. John continued his methodical entries: position, calculated by a handheld GPS, their one piece of advanced electronics that survived, weather observations, and detailed notes on his survival projects. He designed and built a small, crude jury-rigged sail from a storm jib and two broken poles from the bimini top. It was barely controllable, but it gave them a sliver of steerage and, more importantly, a sense of purpose. Evie's contributions to the logbook became their soul. She drew everything. She sketched the strange, deep-water fish they caught. She drew the constellations in the night sky with stunning accuracy. She drew the changing expressions on John's face, the intense concentration as he worked on a project, the deep weariness in his eyes at the end of the day. And she wrote about her fears, her memories of their children, her profound love for John. She described the beauty of the sea that held them captive, the way the setting sun would turn the clouds into works of art, the feeling of a rain squall that meant they would have water to drink for another week. Her entry from day 74, "The ocean took everything from us, and yet it gives us everything we need to live. It gives us rain for water, fish for food, and a current that carries us somewhere, though we know not where. It is our captor and our provider, our hell and our heaven." I've never felt so small and so connected to the universe at the same time. John fixed the jury rig today. He is a genius. I drew a diagram of his knotwork. It is as intricate and beautiful as any sculpture I have ever studied. But the ordeal was taking its toll. By day 100, they were both severely malnourished. Their bodies were wasting away, but their minds, sharpened by the constant challenge, remained clear. They had moments of despair. One afternoon, they spotted a container ship on the distant horizon. They used a signal mirror, they fired their one remaining flare, they screamed until their throats were raw. The ship, a tiny speck moving with infuriating speed, continued on its course, oblivious. The crushing disappointment nearly broke them. Evie wept for a full day. John sat in silence, his face a granite mask. But the next morning, they got back to their routine. They checked the fishing lines. They measured their water. They wrote in the log. They endured. Around day 150, John grew weak. A cut on his leg, a minor injury from a slip on the deck, had become infected. Without antibiotics, his body couldn't fight it. He developed a fever and became delirious. Evie nursed him with all her strength, using their dwindling supply of fresh water to cool his head. She read to him from the logbook, reminding him of their journey, their love, their shared life. He passed away peacefully on the morning of day 162, his head in her lap as the sun rose over the empty sea. Evie was utterly alone. The grief was a physical force, an ocean of sorrow that threatened to drown her. For 3 days, she did nothing. She sat with John's body, speaking to him, holding his hand. But on the 4th day, something inside her, the same resilient spark that had kept them both alive for so long, flickered back to life. She knew John would not want her to give up. She wrapped his body in a sailcloth, weighted it with their small spare anchor, and after reciting a poem they both loved, she committed his body to the deep. Her logbook entries from this period are almost unbearable to read. They are a raw, unfiltered testament to love and loss, but they are also a record of incredible strength. She wrote, "Today I buried my love, my captain, my home. The silence is no longer empty. It is filled with him. I must live. I must get this book, our story, home. This is my purpose now." For another 38 days, Evie survived alone. She was a ghost, a skeleton of a woman, but she performed the daily tasks with a ritualistic devotion. She checked the lines, she drank the rain, and every single day she wrote and drew in the logbook, filling the final pages with their story. Her last entry on the evening of day 199 was simple. "The sun was beautiful today. I think I see Seattle in the clouds. I am very tired now. I love you, John. I love you, kids. I'm coming home." On April 15, 2024, day 200, the US CGC Steadfast was on a routine fisheries patrol in a remote sector of the Pacific, far south of the major shipping lanes. The officer on watch, a young ensign, spotted something on the radar, that shouldn't have been there. It was small, stationary. He looked through the high-powered binoculars. What he saw was a crippled sailboat, dismasted and derelict, covered in a thick coat of marine growth. It looked like a ghost ship. The cutter's captain ordered a boarding team to investigate. As the rigid-hulled inflatable boat approached the derelict vessel, a sense of unease settled over the young Coast Guardsmen. The boat, whose name they could just make out as Serenity, was eerily silent. They hailed it. No response. They cautiously climbed aboard. The deck was a wreck of broken lines and weathered wood. They peered down the companionway into the dark cabin. The air was stale, but there was no smell of death. One of the guardsmen descended the steps, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and then he saw her. In the main cabin, lying on a settee, was the emaciated skeletal form of an old woman. She was unconscious, her breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. She was alive, but just barely. Beside her, placed carefully on her chest as if it were the most precious object in the world, was a thick, leather-bound book, the logbook. Evelyn Davenport was airlifted to a hospital in Hawaii. Her recovery was long and difficult, but she survived. When she was finally strong enough to speak, her first words were not about her ordeal, but about the book. "Our story," she whispered to her children, who were weeping at her bedside. "It's all in there." The logbook of the Serenity became a global phenomenon. Published as 200 Days Adrift, it told a story so incredible it seemed like fiction, but it was real. Every sketch, every entry, every scientific observation and heartfelt confession chronicled their journey from hope to disaster, from desperation to a profound state of grace. It was not a story about a mistake. They had done everything right. They were simply victims of a catastrophic convergence of events in the worst possible place. The true lesson of their story was not about sailing or survival preparation. It was a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit, the ingenuity of a desperate mind, and the enduring strength of love in the face of absolute hopelessness. The world had declared them lost, but for 200 days, sustained by their love for each other and a shared will to live, John and Evelyn Davenport had refused to be. They had simply been finding a different way home.